They said she didn't belong there. A 23-year-old intelligence analyst with cropped blonde hair and trembling hands, standing in a room full of men who'd seen combat before she was born. Colonel Marcus Dane didn't even look up when she entered his tent that morning in the Afghan heat, just waved her off like she was another clerk delivering coffee. She'd driven through 3 checkpoints and a dust storm to get those notes to him. And he snorted, actually snorted, when she laid the folder on his desk. He said something about kids playing spy games, about how real war isn't fought with paperwork. She didn't flinch. She just stood there, silent, waiting for him to open it. Because she knew what was inside would change everything. The tent smelled like diesel and old canvas, the kind of smell that clings to your clothes for days. Outside, the sun hammered down on forward operating base Sentinel like a forge, turning everything bleached and brittle. Inside, the air was thick with tension and the low hum of a generator struggling to keep the laptops running. Lieutenant Emma Graves had been stationed there for 6 months, analyzing intercepts, translating chatter, connecting dots that most people couldn't even see. She was good at her job, brilliant, actually, but nobody wanted to admit that. Not when she looked like somebody's little sister. Not when she'd never fired a weapon outside of basic training. The colonel had built his reputation on gut instinct and battlefield experience, and he didn't trust analysts who'd never felt the ground shake from an IED. But Emma wasn't there for his approval. She was there because she'd found something in the noise, something that made her stomach drop when she realized what it meant. And now, watching him flip through her notes with that dismissive smirk, she wondered if pride would cost them all their lives. He was 3 pages in when his expression changed. The smirk dissolved first, then the color drained from his face, and his jaw went tight, the way it does when a soldier realizes the enemy is closer than they thought. Emma watched his eyes dart back and forth, reading and rereading the decoded message she'd buried in the appendix. It wasn't in her notes. It was underneath them, printed on a separate sheet with a classification level that made even colonels sit up straight. She'd intercepted it 48 hours earlier, a fragment of communication between 2 unknown parties, encrypted in a pattern she'd seen only once before in her training. It had taken her 36 hours without sleep to crack it, cross-referencing old Soviet codes with modern jihadist syntax, until finally the words emerged like a ghost materializing from fog. And what those words said made her blood run cold. There was an attack planned, not on some distant outpost or convoy route. Here, on Fabi Sentinel, within 72 hours. And the infiltrator was already inside the wire. Colonel Dane looked up at her then, really looked at her for the first time. His voice was different now, stripped of condescension, raw with urgency. "How certain are you?" Emma didn't hesitate. "Certain enough to stake my career on it, sir. Certain enough to stake my life." He stood up slowly, the chair scraping against the plywood floor, and for a moment she saw past the rank and the bravado to the man underneath, someone who had lost people, someone who carried ghosts in his eyes. He asked her if she knew who the infiltrator was. She said no, not yet, but she had a list of 7 possibles based on access patterns and movement logs. He told her she had 12 hours to narrow it down. She told him she'd need his authority to question people, to access classified personnel files, to do things that would make her wildly unpopular. He gave it to her without hesitation. And just like that, the girl they'd dismissed became the only person standing between 500 soldiers and a massacre. The next 12 hours were a blur of interrogations and data points, of watching faces for micro-expressions and cross-referencing alibis with security footage. Emma barely ate, barely breathed, just moved from one lead to the next, like she was tracing a wire in the dark, knowing one wrong move could set everything off. She found him at hour 11, a supply sergeant named Patterson, who had been taking photos of defensive positions and asking too many questions about patrol schedules. When they searched his quarters, they found a phone hidden inside a hollowed-out Quran, messages confirming the attack plan for the next morning. The colonel had him arrested quietly. No drama, no fanfare, just disappeared him before anyone could ask questions. Then Dane did something Emma never expected. He called her into his office, closed the door, and apologized. Not a military apology, stiff and procedural, but a real one. He told her he'd been wrong, that he'd let his assumptions cloud his judgment, that she'd saved lives that night. Emma didn't know what to say. She'd spent 6 months being invisible, and suddenly she was seen. The attack never came. The network collapsed when Patterson was taken, the whole operation unraveling like a thread pulled from a sweater. Emma got a commendation that she'd never be able to talk about, the kind that doesn't come with a ceremony, just a quiet nod from people who know. But the real change was subtler. The way soldiers started nodding to her in the chow hall, the way the colonel started asking her opinion in briefings, listening when she spoke. She was still the same person, young, slight, more comfortable with computers than combat, but now they saw her differently. They saw what she'd always been, a warrior who fought with her mind instead of a rifle, someone who proved that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's the quiet voice at the end of the day saying, "I found something." And sometimes that's enough to change everything. Years later, when Emma was long gone from that desert and that life, she'd think about that morning in the tent, about the colonel's snort and the weight of those notes in her hands. She'd think about how close they came to disaster, and how the difference between tragedy and survival was one person refusing to be dismissed. Because that's what heroism really looks like sometimes, not a dramatic sacrifice or a blaze of glory, but simply showing up, doing the work, and trusting that the truth will speak louder than doubt. In a war full of explosions, she'd won a battle with silence, patience, and a decoded message that nobody thought to take seriously until it was almost too late. And that colonel who snorted at her notes? He wrote her a letter of recommendation that got her into the CIA, and it started with 5 words that said everything. "I was wrong about her.